I'd like to begin with a quote. There was a British writer called Somerset Maugham, and he was once asked about his creative process. And he said, there are three rules for writing a novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. And one of the things I love about studying creativity and exploring the creative process is there is something magical and mystical and unknowable about it, you know? And that's kind of beautiful. I don't think we're ever really going to know where great ideas come from. People have theories. The ancient Greeks believed that the nine daughters of Zeus, the Muses, were responsible for kind of blowing ideas down upon poets and artists and musicians. All creative people needed to do was just get in the right frame of mind to receive, to breathe in the inspiration from the Muses. I interviewed a writer this week on my podcast, Horatio Clare, and he talked about books finding you, which I thought was really interesting. Another novelist, novelists often talk about it in this kind of way. Ali Smith, I would argue maybe the greatest living British novelist at the moment, said in an interview that I read, I've always felt that a book's already written, whatever it is we're writing. Our job is to unearth it without breaking it or doing damage in the digging. Maybe all these people are right. Maybe none of them are right. Who knows? What I do know is that there is a process you can follow. And if you follow this process, it makes it more likely for the ideas to arrive. And that's the goal. That's the content of today's webinar. There are really 7 stages, at least in my opinion. You may have a different view, but if it's okay with you, I would like to take you through them. Stephen King made the same point as Ali Smith. Joe says there's a wonderful book, isn't there, by Stephen King on writing, where he talks both about his life and his writing process. Lots of great stuff in that. So let's begin with stage number 1. Now, I'm framing this talk on the assumption that most people here are creative professionals, designers and copywriters and directors, that kind of thing. But even if you're attending as an artist, I think there may be things in here for you. But if you are a professional creative, then the chances are you've been approached by a client, and that client has a problem, and they are inviting you to come up with a solution. And most of the time, the client's problem is described in a brief. Here is a wonderful brief. It is the Coca-Cola bottle design brief from 1915. A bottle so distinct that it could be recognized by touch in the dark or when lying broken on the ground. Now, most briefs are not as simple or as elegant as this. Most briefs are fucking terrible. You know this, I know this. I think it's because people who write briefs have never been taught how to do it properly. But most briefs are way too long, they're underthought, they're overcomplicated, and very often the single-minded proposition is made up of 3, 4, 5 different points. So your first job when you get that brief is to sort it out. And there are 3 things you need to be certain of. Who are we talking to? What are we attempting to tell them? And most importantly, and this is the thing that's most often missing from briefs, why should they care? Donald Trump's been elected. The climate is getting hotter. Everyone has less money than they did before. Life is tough, man. Life is tough for all of us. And we're bombarded with all these messages all the time. What is it about the thing you have to say that has any meaning or relevance or resonance to the target audience? And you really, really need to get to grips with that, understand it. It should be there in the brief, but sometimes you have to dig around a little bit. And a really good tip, particularly when you've got quite a long brief, is to try and get that brief down to a single sentence. It's a really healthy thing to do at the start of the process. I would do that and then I often share it with the client. And if you do that, the client either goes, wow, Richard, oof, that's a lovely encapsulation of the challenge, in which case, boom, quid's in already. Or they might go, yeah, but I think you're missing this important element. And again, you're at an advantage to your rival designers and directors and agencies there, because you have an insight about what the client thinks is important. So that's what I'd encourage you to do when you're first beginning. So that's kind of, it's quite a bit of work. You're exercising your grey matter. The second stage is where you get to have a bit of fun, and this is the stage that I call exploring. Now, it's important to say that even at stage 2, you're not trying to have an idea yet. You may have an idea, in which case write it down, but don't linger over it. That is not the point just yet. What you're trying to do right now is get the compost together from which the seed of an idea can grow. You need to get stuff into your head. As Joe Strummer from The Clash said, no input, no output. So you really got to focus on input at this stage before moving to output. And there are ways you can do this. An obvious one is to look for imagery, references, inspiration, things that might have some kind of thematic connection with your task. I love doing this. I get a nice cup of tea on the go and some ambient tunes in the background, and I mooch around the internet through me books, which are over there and in the house, and just kind of browse in a very sort of exploratory kind of way. The one thing I must underscore is that always try and get outside your category. So if you've been asked to design a logo, then don't look for inspiration in other logos. Or if you've got to come up with an idea for a TV commercial, don't be looking at TV commercials. Look at art, music, and novels, and paintings, and books, and things that you see while you have a cup of coffee in the local cafe. I do a conversation with creatives on the last Friday every month. If you'd like to come along, you can. We talk about 5 inspirational things. And at the last one, Nikolai, pointed me in the direction of Cosmos. I don't know if you've heard of Cosmos. It's like a more creative, friendly version of Pinterest. You can search by color, you can input images, and then it will find similar images. And people who look on Pinterest generally end up with very similar references. And this feels like quite a nice place to have a little play. Cosmos.so, I think, is the URL. Another thing that I like to do are word lists. I sometimes work with a wonderful French agency called Gedeon, and they often hire me to come up with ideas. And I think it was last year they asked me to come up with some ideas to promote the Premier League on Amazon. And one of the first things I always do, get a pen, bit of scrap paper, and I just write lists and lists of words that have a thematic connection to the project. So I wrote down things like goal striker, defender, midfield, white lines, goalpost, penalty kicks, grass, ground, stadium, floodlights, groundsman, scoreboard, announcer, blah, 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 all the way down to top bins, screamer, daisy cutter, divot, and save. This to me is almost like creative limbering up. You're sort of just getting loose. You're getting in the kind of flow, and having these list of words will be useful later on. So I would say, even if you're a designer and you're working purely visually, these word lists are a really good thing to do. Then number 3 is to speak to your audience. It's amazing how often people overlook this. To just chat to some real people in your target demographic. Could be friends or family or colleagues, people who could be interested in the message you're trying to communicate, and ask them about this thing, about football, and why they love it, and what they do, and what it means to them, what's bad about it. You can also do a bit of social listening. Go online, look on the socials, find a Reddit forum where people are talking about the product. You'll most likely gain some really helpful insights by exploring what real people are actually saying about the challenge or the problem. So you filled your head with good stuff. You've got all this kind of mulch and compost from which an idea can grow. The third stage is one that seems a little bit counterintuitive. This is the incubation phase. Some of you may know that I have a podcast. I've already mentioned it once. It's a kind of occasional podcast now. Whenever I come across somebody who I think will make a great guest, I ask them. And if they say yes, I make an episode. It's called The Wind Thieved Hat. And the reason I called it The Wind Thieved Hat was because I was reading a book about Stan Laurel, of Stan Laurel and Laurel and Hardy, the early 20th century silent comedians. And Stan Laurel was the one who came up with the gags. And this book is kind of, it imagines the interior world of Stan Laurel. It's all from his point of view. And in the book, there's a passage where John Connolly, the author, writes, "He has tried to write more gags, but the remaining pages of his legal pad remain bare. Some days you have to walk away and let the gags come to you instead of running after them like a man in pursuit of a wind-thieved hat." And I love this. I think the more we chase ideas, the more elusive they become. And it can seem like the thing you should be doing, hammering away at your desk because the clock's ticking. But often that's counterproductive. Another great novelist, Jonathan Franzen, author of The Corrections, said, "You see more sitting still than chasing after." So when you filled your head with all that stuff, a really important thing is just to slow down and take a breath. We understand neuroscientifically now through fMRI scans a bit more about what's happening in our brains as we have ideas. And psychologists and neuroscientists think that there are two modes of thought that are important when it comes to creativity: analytical thinking and spontaneous thinking. And analytical thinking is the thinking you do when you know you're thinking, when you sit down and try and solve a problem. So when you were trying to encapsulate the brief in a single sentence, that was using analytical thinking. Spontaneous thinking is the thinking that happens when we don't realize we're thinking. So you know how an idea will pop into your head when you're in the shower? That's spontaneous thought. And we used to think that when we were not consciously thinking, our brains were resting, but that's not actually true. In fact, the brain's networking together in all kinds of unpredictable ways. And here's the thing: analytical thinking will move you forward in small logical steps, very useful at certain points. But those big inspirational paradigm shifting leaps, they're born of spontaneous thinking. So you have to create in your process a bit of space for spontaneous thought to happen. We do our best thinking when we're not thinking, which is a line I stole from John Hegarty, the old advertising guy. So Einstein knew this. When he got stuck, he would play the violin. He would lose himself in a piece of classical music and just allow the thorny equation in his head to kind of ferment. Margaret Atwood, another of our great writers, walks. Walking leads to rumination. Rumination leads to poetry. It's been found that we're approximately 60% more creative when we're walking than when we're sitting behind our desks. I've just got myself a standing desk. I don't know whether that makes a difference. Anyway, that's by the by. I like to go for a run here in the mountains in South Wales, and I find if I run sort of at a very gentle pace, not too fast, where I have to concentrate on not falling over, but at a gentle pace, the ideas will arrive. I always have to remember to take my phone so I can remember them when I get back. Does anybody find that ideas arrive when they're in the shower? I thought I would invite you into a little bit of audience interaction here. If you're still there, Jacob, Richard says no, Riggs says yes. Yeah, people often do, Craig too. And there's a reason for this. So when you're in the shower, you're doing something that you've done thousands of times before, so you don't have to think about it. There's an order, I'm sure, in which you wash yourself. You don't have to think about it. So your mind can drift. And in the shower, you have the sound of the water, which is a kind of white noise. And white noise creates alpha brain waves. Alpha brain waves are quite high frequency brain waves that we associate with daydreaming. So that's why you have great ideas in the shower. Now, not everybody's the same, for some people it's driving, other people it's mowing the lawn, and for Deb it's when she's staring at the kitchen wall waiting for the kettle to boil. Whatever it is, find that thing and do it. Make sure you always do it whenever you've got to come up with an idea. Build a bit of time into the process. Richard did have an idea in the shower just this morning. There we go. Could be the start of something new. Find that thing and do it, even if the clock is ticking on the wall. Do we have any procrastinators along today? Oh yeah, Riggs is there. Yep, Craig, Neil. He says, Jacob, Joe. Yeah, we've got some procrastinators. I think most of us are procrastinators. Well, the good news is studies have proven that procrastination can make you more creative. Yes. But here's the thing. There are two kinds of procrastination, good and bad. Good procrastination is when you deliberately delay intellectually engaging with the task and just allow some time for incubation. Bad procrastination is often described as being lazy, but more often than not, it's not. You've got some deep-seated fear of failing, of the outcome not being as good as it can be. Maybe you're a perfectionist, and so you keep on kicking it down the tracks. That's no good. That's bad procrastination. But good procrastination is where you have every faith in engaging with this task, but you're just going to delay it a little bit. There's a study I read where they got a bunch of creative professionals together, gave them a brief, and then they made half of them start the brief immediately and the other half play solitaire, which is a sort of fairly mindless card game, just for 20 minutes. And the solitaire players all came up with ideas which were significantly more original than those people who just set to the task straight away. So it's a lovely thing to do. Marcelo's reading about these points in Rick Rubin's excellent book. And yeah, that really is a great book about the creative process. It's over there and on the wall next to my Nick Cave door wedge, which maybe you can spot. Here's a story I've not told for a little while. It's one of my favourites about Leonardo da Vinci. So he famously painted The Last Supper, which is it's a mural. It's painted on the wall of a church in Milan. And shortly after he'd been commissioned to make this painting, he got in a lot of trouble because the Duke who'd hired him noticed that every day Leonardo would turn up in the church, look at the wall, and then go off and walk around the gardens without having painted anything at all. And one day it all got too much, and the Duke was very cross, summoned Leonardo to his castle, and he's like, "What the fuck? I paid you all this money. You just rock up every morning and then go wander around the garden." And Leonardo said, "Those of lofty genius sometimes accomplish the most when they work the least." Boom. Have that, Duke. Okay. Joe's asking, how is originality defined? A question for later. Yes, I would love to answer that question later on. Joe says, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Nice. Let's move on to stage 4 now, which is flow. Does anybody know who this guy is? It's not Father Christmas, although he looks a little bit like him. This rather smiley and avuncular fella has maybe the most confusing name of anybody I'm going to mention in my talk this afternoon. Tell you what, if you get this right, I'm going to send you a free copy of my book. Your time starts now. Any guesses? It's not Abraham Lincoln either, just in case. Nor is it Rick Rubin, the beard's not long enough. Nobody's got any guesses. Go on. No guesses. All right. I'll tell you. It is. Oh, whoa. Boom. Jakub, well done. It is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And if you haven't got a copy of my book already, email me your address afterwards and I will send you one. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he's already got the book. Oh, God bless you. Have you got this book by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi? If not, I'll send you this. We'll sort out a book. Okay. And this book it coined the term flow, and many of you will have heard of this idea of creative flow. It's when you're so absorbed in the task that the ideas seem to just flow through you. Time falls away, it's beautiful when the script seems to write itself. How do you get in this state of flow where the ideas are just coming? 2 ways that I think will help. Number 1, use a pen and a bit of paper, not a computer. The reason for this is that the temptation on a computer is always to edit. If you're trying to write a script, it'll spell check it and you go back and you arrest the creative process. You stop the flow. The second thing is to forget about quality and focus on quantity. This is one of the most important things I can tell you about the creative process. Lovely anecdote about a ceramics teacher. One morning he got his pottery class together and he said, okay guys, this morning before lunchtime, I'm going to split the class into 2. I want you to make one beautiful pot. You've got till lunchtime, 1 pot, but the best pot you can possibly make. And he said to you guys, I want you to make as many pots as you possibly can. 3 hours go by, gets to lunchtime. These guys, the single pot guys, are tearing their hair out. They've got these incredibly overworked pots. They're all kind of really stressed and strung out. These guys have got loads of beautiful pots because they've just relaxed. They've got in a groove. They've stopped thinking about even making pots. They've just made the pots. Quantity always leads to quality. And most of us sit down, we want to have a great idea, but as soon as you try and have a great idea, you're on a hide into nowhere, All you need to be thinking about is just how many ideas I can come up with. What's really interesting to me is that great artists and musicians and writers don't have a better ratio of good ideas to bad ideas than me or you. It's roughly about the same, but they'd have a shitload more ideas. Picasso famously made 20,000 artworks in his lifetime. Some of those were rubbish, but quite a lot of them were good. You've just got to concentrate on volume. Kendrick Lamar, the only hip-hop artist to have won the Pulitzer Prize, says, I own up to a lot of hours of just listening and studying and throwing thousands of pieces of paper away that were garbage. More ideas equals more great ideas. Techniques you can try to get you in the groove. I love beginning by, instead of trying to get the best idea, you ask yourself, what is the worst possible idea I can come up with for this project? Here's an example. Let's say you've got to launch a plant-based mayonnaise. What you might say is, well, let's do a taste test. That makes sense, doesn't it? We'll compare our mayonnaise against plant-based mayonnaise against regular mayonnaise. Yeah, that's kind of conventional idea. But what if we get people who hate mayonnaise to do it? That would be a terrible idea, or would it? Here's a little film.
To a focus group for people that hate mayonnaise.
I said I hated mayonnaise, so why would they give me mayonnaise?
I don't like anything with mayonnaise.
It makes everything taste so bad.
Here we
once
go.
it's in like a sandwich or something or a salad, you automatically taste. Anyways.
Yeah, a little nervous.
All right, welcome to the taste test. How are you feeling?
My mission in life is to avoid mayonnaise.
You came in and said we won't be eating mayo, and I don't believe that for a second.
A cheeseburger.
Is that mayo?
I promise you on my eldest son's life, that is not mayo.
I'm not trying to be a but I'm staring at it and it's clearly mayonnaise.
1, 2, and 3.
This is mayonnaise.
It's not mayo.
It's definitely mayo.
Tastes like bad memories.
Kind of makes me feel sick.
How do you like cheeseburger? Give it a lick. How's it taste?
I'm tripping out.
It's mayo. How is it not mayo?
That's not mayo. I promise you this is really not mayo.
That looks like mayonnaise.
You don't look well. You okay?
I'm not doing this no more. This is sadistic.
It is
This a
sadistic.
sadistic production.
That's not mayo.
Okay.
What's it taste like?
Mayonnaise.
It's lousy. It's
I'm good, thank you.
cut.
Plant-based mayo.
Not mayo.
Why do I care if it's the exact same thing?
It's mayonnaise. This is mayonnaise. This is mayonnaise. This is mayonnaise.
It's not mayonnaise. Yeah, I love that. Sorry if we have any mayonnaise haters here who are maybe watching this webinar while they eat lunch. Glad you enjoyed that. Yeah, it's really lovely, isn't it? Another great one is to give yourself a constraint. So the more constraints you give people, the more creative and the less conventional they're forced to become. A really nice example that I love to share is the sunglasses firm, Ace and Tate, did this fly poster campaign where they didn't show their sunglasses. They just had people squinting against the sun, and the line was "Bring on the sun." And that can be a really nice one. You know, what if we create a campaign or a poster or a commercial or an ad without showing the product? It's a really nice constraint to try. Another technique that I'm a fan of is oppositional thinking. So you ask yourself, what would most people do in this situation, most brands or most designers, and what happens if I do the opposite? So if you're hired by a financial services company to sell mortgages and to advertise their mortgage product, then most people would use happy couples, a bit of shallow focus, kind of sort of muted palette, all good vibes and sweet and But anybody here who's trying to get a mortgage will know that the truth of getting a mortgage is a fucking nightmare. You know, it's one of the most stressful things you can do other than actually moving. And Habito, which is the UK's fastest growing financial services company, recognised this and deliberately flipped what people normally do. It's a wonderful example of oppositional thinking, and it is my second clip of the afternoon.
Want to save money on your mortgage? It's either or Habito.
One more technique for you to try to get those ideas flowing is to think about what you can take away, which seems kind of counterintuitive because the creative act is often thought of as an additional one, you know. But sometimes the most creative thing you can do is to remove something. This was an ad which ran during the Euros from the Migration Museum here in the UK, and it was the England team without immigration, and you can see that leaves only three players: Phil Foden, John Stones, and Pickford. I need to get a bit better on me first names of footballers, but the point stands. The point stands, which is 15 of the 26-man England squad were either born abroad or had parents or grandparents who were born abroad and could have qualified for other nations. Really nice. Taking something away. Jordan, of course. It's been a long week, Neil. It's been a long week for all of us, I'm sure. Things keep slipping, but you're here to help. Jordan Pickford, of course. Just before Christmas last year, Netflix launched season 2 of Looper, which is about a jewel thief in Paris. And the way they did this was to use the kind of aesthetic of high-end jewelry ads, but with the jewelry removed. Lupin coming to Netflix on the 5th of October. Nice. You could also revisit your word list. You know, you go back to those word lists and you pick a word off the word list. Divot, groundsman, pies, and you think about how can we make it an idea from the pies that people have in UK football grounds, at least at half time. Or you could collaborate with AI. You ask ChatGPT to write a commercial. It'll most likely be very conventional, and then you see, well, what would happen if we did the opposite? You could ask ChatGPT to generate the cliches or the tropes around the category, and then you could flip them. You could ask ChatGPT about conventional beliefs held about the product, and then play devil's advocate. What happens if you flip that belief? Thomas Edison said, when you've exhausted all possibilities, remember this, you haven't. Number 5 is to evaluate. So you've got a bunch of ideas. How on earth do you know which ideas to take forwards? One thing I would say, be really cautious with those ideas that immediately feel quite comfortable. The chances are that they feel comfortable because they're the most conventional ones. You've been exposed to them before. They feel like the kind of thing you should do because you've seen it before. The most interesting ideas are those that just feel a little bit uncomfortable or a little bit awkward, a little bit abrasive. That's often where the really good stuff lies. So you go back to the brief at this point. Remind, because you've been off on a bit of a journey, exploring, incubating, flowing. You go back to the brief, remind yourself of the challenge, and then you have a cold, hard, analytical thinking look at your ideas. And you ask 4 questions. Number 1, which idea is the most creatively exciting? Which is the one I want to put on my show reel, in my portfolio, which is the one that I'm going to enter into awards next year, purely from my creative point of view. Number 2, if I was the client, which one would I pick? If my bonus depended on, indeed my job depended on the commercial outcome of this, the commercial success, which one would I pick? And sometimes that can be a little bit different. Which could be executed best given the resources? Your budget is going to be big or medium or small. You're going to have a comfortable amount of time or fuck all time. Given what you've got, which idea is most likely to be able to be made well within those constraints? And then finally, and this is quite a subtle test, but an important one, which one couldn't carry a competitor's logo? So let's say you're making an ad for Nike. If you could put an Adidas logo on the end, then the chances are you're not quite on brand. You know, there's a subtlety. We all know what a Nike ad feels like, and if it can, always try sticking if you're making an ad for Discovery, stick a National Geographic logo on the end, and if it works, then it's not on brand enough, or your client's brand is not well defined enough. And if that's the case, then maybe you can get some extra work out of them. I'd encourage you, from all these many ideas you've had, to aim for 3. And 3 is quite a good number. And you want 3 kind of strong ideas, obviously, but diverse ones, ones that come at it from a different angle, Maybe something's a live action shoot, something else is design based, another is very script heavy. So we've interrogated, we've explored, we've incubated, we've flowed, and we have evaluated. Now, if you arrive at the evaluation point and you go, oof, I'm not sure I've quite nailed it yet, then you can go back, maybe go back to the incubation phase, go for a walk down a park, have a shower. I can't remember who it was. Was it Kate said something about making a cup of tea? Deb, go make a cup of tea. And then you go back and you try again. You try some different idea generation techniques, which I can share with you another time, and off you go again. 2 more stages left before I share my news, and you get to ask some questions. Number 6 is refine. So you got an idea. If you're like me, that idea will be scribbled on a bit of paper. It's an abstract concept at the moment. You've got to give it some form. Most of the time I get hired to write scripts and come up with ideas that can be scripts. So now I've got to turn this idea into a script. The really important thing here is if you've got to write a 30-second script, write a 2-minute script. Over elaborate. And you can apply this in design to whatever medium you're working in. You want to go further than you need to go, because if you do that, that gives you scope to pare back. And in overreaching, you'll create things that could be useful. So you always want to make it bigger, longer, because in making it shorter, it will get stronger. Even though that rhymes, I think it's a bit of a shit quote. But the point is, the more you cut, the closer you get to the truth. Orson Welles knew this. Stanley Kubrick knew this. Marina Abramovich, one of my creative heroes, the performance artist, knows this. She describes the creative process as more and more of less and less, which I think is lovely. That's a good quote. What's that one thing you're trying to communicate? You want more and more of that, and less of the stuff that's getting in the way. Ask yourself, is every element earning its keep? Is every bit of my design adding to what I want, to the experience of my audience when they engage with it? In Stephen King's book, he says the best advice he ever got was when he got a rejection letter that said, not bad, but puffy. Formula is second draft equals first draft minus 10%. So whatever you're doing, aim to lose 10%. So if you're writing, I don't know, a 200 word, in my case, I write a lot of articles these days, 2,000 word article, aim to cut it by 200 words and you will make it immeasurably better. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the French aviator and poet and writer, said, a designer knows they've achieved perfection, not when there is nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. I'm off to Paris in a couple of weeks. Can't wait. Number 7, execute. So now you've got your script. It's been approved by the client. Some of you may be wondering about pitching, but I did that webinar back in the spring. So let's just assume that your client has bought the idea. Now you've got to execute it. But one of your ideas, one of the 3. When it comes to execution, David Lynch, he says this. There's a lovely little book. I've no doubt Jakob's probably got this book. It's called Catching the Big Fish. And it's all about kind of meditation and creativity and consciousness. But he says the idea is the whole thing. If you stay true to the idea, it tells you everything you need to know, really. You just keep working to make it look like that idea looked, felt like it felt, sounded like it sounded, and be the way it was. And it's weird, because when you veer off, you sort of know it. You know when you're doing something that is not correct because it feels incorrect. It says, no, this isn't like the idea said it was. And when you're getting it into the correct way, it feels correct. It's an intuition. You think your way through. You start one place, and as you go, it gets more and more finely tuned. But all along, it's the idea talking. At some point, it feels correct to you, and you hope that it feels somewhat correct to others. In a nutshell, listen to the idea. You know, as the creative, you are the guardian of the idea now. And that idea, until it's made, is a fragile thing. And you need to nurture it and look after it and make sure nobody extinguishes that flame. The other thing I'd say is accident is often the best thing that can happen to you in the creative process. The things that happen that we weren't expecting are often those things that turn something from good into great. This week, Samantha Harvey won the Booker Prize, the most prestigious literary prize, with her novel Orbital, which is set on the International Space Station. Has anybody read this book yet? I'm just going to leave that hanging in the comments while I tell the story of how she wrote it. So she started writing it in lockdown, and she got about 5,000 words in. I haven't read it either. And I was chatting to Horatio Clare, who I interviewed for the podcast, and he's like, man, you got to read this book. It's such a beautiful book. Could be a nice one for Christmas, maybe. Anyway, Samantha was writing it during lockdown, and she got about 5,000 words in. And she had a crisis of confidence. She said, she thought to herself, who am I to write a novel about the International Space Station when I've never been anywhere near space? So she gave up. And the intervening years elapsed. And then not so long ago, she opened a laptop to work on another book. And she accidentally opened the Word document with the original manuscript for Orbital in. She started reading it and she was like, wow, this is actually quite good. This prose has got way more vitality to it than the thing I'm working on. Fuck it, I'm gonna carry on. And she did. She got to the end. It was published. She's won the Booker Prize, and her career will never be the same again. You know, Joe has shared a clip about the final stages of Blackadder, which I won't watch now. Obviously, that would be inappropriate. But I've put it up there. Thanks, Joe, for the tip. There is Samantha Harvey. There's quite a nice article in The Guardian with all the Booker nominees talking about how they came up with the ideas for their novels. Interrogate, explore, incubate, flow, evaluate, refine, execute. 7 stages. I don't know where ideas come from, but I can say from my own experience that when I follow this process, they generally show up, and I humbly put this before you in the hope that you may find it helpful and the ideas may come to you. I've been talking for a bit longer than I expected, but we do still have time for some questions. Before I take them, I am going to tell you that in June this year, I hosted 2 workshops in London, and it was the first time I'd ever done workshops for individuals rather than for teams. Normally I get hired by in-house to go work with in-house creative teams. And a bunch of people turned up in Soho. I did 2 sessions, and the feedback was lovely. We had a really nice time. So I'm going to do them again, 2 different sessions in January. I'm going to do what makes great work great. This session is where we understand the key qualities of great creative work, and you'll leave this session with your own creative manifesto, which will be a super useful document as you progress through your creative careers. See you later, Gary. You did warn me you'd have to leave. I'll send a recording to you. The second one is Unleash the Power of Words, and this is all about copywriting, and I'll be sharing tips that I've learned from writing books and writing lots and lots of scripts on how to make your words impactful and effective. They're going to be happening in Soho at the Century Club on Friday, January the 31st. Each session is £250 per person, but you guys can have the early bird price of £200 if you book before Christmas. And if that sounds like a lot of money, maybe you can get your boss to pay. Ask them. You get to look diligent, they get to look generous, everybody's a winner. There's 13 spaces on each course, because I'm going to offer 1 space to anybody who is out of work at the moment. And I don't say that to sound good, I say that because maybe there's somebody on this call who wants to throw their hat on in the ring. So that's it. I'd love to, there's a button actually, there's a button. You can click on that, and it will tell you more about those workshops, and they're coming up, and I would love to see any of you on them. Right, now can't see my slides. I need to close that. There we go. So here we are. It's just coming up to 10 to 2 here in South Wales. Does anybody have any questions to ask about this? Kareem, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kareem. I have a bit of a challenging question. I work for the BBC, and a significant part of my role involves generating ideas to promote news coverage and investigative products, such as podcasts and documentaries. How can I develop original ideas that neither trivialize the content nor make it overly doom and gloom? That is a challenging question, Kareem, but it's a really interesting one. Way back in my career, I had to make BBC News trailers too. Certainly one way would be to give yourself the deliberate constraint of not using any of the footage, which can often be quite daunting and disturbing. I always used to like doing sort of text-based things and things that deliberately stepped away from the kind of vernacular of news presentation. Beyond that, I suppose it's trying to frame the material in terms of a useful audience benefit. So, you know, you understand this thing, which may seem terrible, but in so doing, that would give you an enlightened or an enriched perspective, which may help you avoid situations like that in the future, or think differently, or have a more generous spirit, or you look for the positive. I think in the negative would be what I would say, but without understanding a specific challenge, it's a bit further to go deeper than that. I hope Kareem, that's helpful. Neil says, you go for runs, but what and when do you eat? When I go, what do you mean? When I'm running? I eat 3 meals a day, on the nose. My wife is always amused at how rigid I am with 3 meals. And if I'm going on a long run, I'll pack a banana or a kind of nut bar, something like that. Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Aaron, too. I would love to come back to the US. That would be very nice. See you later, Ahmed. Riggs, tricks for finding new ideas and enthusiasm for the same old brief. Yeah, well, certainly some of those creative idea thought starters that I talked about, constraints and what's the worst idea. One thing I'd say is if it's the same old brief, then by definition, that means you're promoting or communicating something that the audience is already very familiar with. And I think that is often an amazing creative opportunity, because it means that the stuff you would normally have to do with a launch or something early on in the life cycle of a product, like you know, establishing its functions, or if it's a drama, its characters, or you know, its tone, or these kind of things. You don't have to do any of that hard work because it's already been done, and you can have a lot of fun. And one thing almost always works brilliantly when you've got a long established product is to promote it as something else. And that's a really fun way of doing something fresh. The audience gets it and is amused by it because you've taken something they're familiar with and you've put it in a new category. So that would be one that I would encourage you to try. And there we go. I don't have any more questions at the moment, but I'm going to stick around. I've still got 20 odd people here. Please follow me on the website, richardholman.com. There's a mailer going out next week. I'm on Instagram at richardholman__creativity. You'll find me on YouTube, The Creative Coach. I was on X, but I've come off because I don't like Elon Musk. And you can follow me on LinkedIn or connect on LinkedIn. But thank you very much, everybody, for being here on this Friday afternoon. I really, if you've got any questions, I'll hang around until I can see you've all gone. I really hope that was helpful. And if you can, come along in January. It's going to be fun.